Welcome back to another chess game analysis video. So in the last few months I've been experimenting a little bit more with white openings and what to do after e4, e5. And I've already covered the Göring Gambit on this channel, and many people liked this video a lot, so I decided to go for another variation in this another video in this variation, which I think is also very interesting. And I found this game on in the Lichess database between Oleg Kulikov and Valentin Arbakov, both from the ratings, classical ratings, international masters, good players. So let's see this game. After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, now you can still go into a Spanish variation or an Italian game, or you can play something completely different. d4, the center game, I think an interesting variation if you want to maybe catch your opponent a little bit off guard. Many people on low ratings are probably not prepared for this. ed4, may move c3, and now we go into the Göring Gambit, sacrificing the pawn, and after d takes c3, I've already made a video. You can go with a very aggressive move, which is actually the main move, sacrifice yet another pawn, and after you go here, you get this position where it's called a double pawn sacrifice variation, but you have a lot of development, so this is an interesting variation that you can get into. If you haven't seen the video, check out. Very nice game from Yang Yu Yi in this position. I'm gonna link it, of course. So c3 is the other approach. Oh wait, after takes, now you have another approach. Knight takes c3, immediately getting back a pawn. So now you only basically sacrifice one pawn for the development. d6, and now bishop c4. Instead of developing the bishop first you develop the bishop now, and now you only sacrifice one pawn and you're well developed. Bishop e6, one of the moves that already have been played a few times. You try to immediately trade off this bishop, which white does, and the f pawn takes. You see the king a little bit vulnerable here, and after queen b3 you have a double attack. So already in this variation you see that basically white is probably gonna win back this pawn eventually. I thought a very interesting variation is queen d7 here, defending the e pawn, and white can grab here on b7, but after rook b8, you see this is very common, this motif. You see that a lot with the rook basically already developed on the half open file. The queen is alright, the knight is defended for now, and after like queen a6 you can develop naturally with bishop e7. And the engine says that white is slightly better, having won back his pawn, but black got some activity, some development moves in as well. So this is playable, very sharp variation if you want to study this a little bit. Or if you have games with this position, you can send that to me. I think it's very interesting. But in the game, Valentin played queen c8, which aims to defend both pawns instead of creating counterplay. If the engine objectively agrees with this move as well, this is a good move. Looks a little bit unnatural, the queen on c8, but you can, in this concrete position, play this. Knight g5, main move development, and now attacking this pawn. Knight d8, now defending the pawn, and you already see white has sacrificed one pawn, but all the pieces of black on the back rank, the king a little bit vulnerable, and white is well developed, so we can safely say that white has development and therefore compensation for one pawn. And with f4 you have at least two pawns here in the center, two knights developed, queen developed. So I think I like this position for white. I would choose white any day of the week if it came for a classical tournament game here. A one pawn compensation, the engine says, is enough, so it's equal, but black is definitely not better in this position. Bishop e7, an attempt to develop, and maybe you try to trade off this very strong knight here on g5 at some point. Castles kingside, bishop takes g5, and f takes g5, and you see the bishop basically already wasted or moved twice. So while black has nothing developed, king is castled, you have a couple of advanced pawns, rook on an open file already, queen and knight here. So I like this variation, I think it's very interesting. Knight e7 development, bishop e3 development, knight f7, Now trying to get the knight into the game. I think black is playing alright so far. Knight b5, a6, and this is a mistake already. In this position, black should develop, not naturally bring the knight to c6. Maybe at some point you can try to bring the queen here along castle, and this should be okay. Still a little bit of compensation for white, but mostly equal. But with a6, the problem is that the knight gets rerouted to d4. Now again pressuring the pawn, which is now again hanging. Knight d8 back and defending the pawn. You see black desperately tries to hold on to this center pawn that he has won through the white gambit. Rook f3, now trying to double the rooks. This rook doesn't participate in the game yet, and it needs to come here or maybe here to one of the open files. So rook f3, I think an understandable move, and now rook f8 also seems very interesting. But the ancient says it's actually not a good move. You should actually strike in the center with c5 and removing the knight, and now argue that basically you have a little bit more squares, like a little bit more space on the queen side. Maybe you can at some point push b5 and in a weird kind of way maybe develop and get the king to safety. Black should be a little bit better here. Rook f8 tries to exchange one of the rooks, which is a good idea generally if you up material, and black is up a pawn here. So not wanting to exchange the rooks. Rook h3, I think very human and understandable move would just be to rook f8, take the rook, king f8, rook f1 check, king g8, and argue that you have nothing developed with black, and the king isn't so safe either. The queen is looking in here with the knight. Maybe there is something to open here. Rook is here. So h4 says the engine, attacking with the pawns here, and the king is actually safer than his counterpart here on g8. This would have been, I think, a very nice idea, and also logical, very forced. Taking the rook, and this variation brings the other rook into the game, and white is way better developed here and has a little bit of an edge, but I think with best defense it's still a draw. However, white, very principled, not wanting to exchange here, holds the rook on the board, attacks the pawn here, aims to maybe get this break in, which we're going to see later in the game. Rook h8, defending the rook. And now interesting, I think, would have been if you go here, I go back, and then we can middle of the board with a lot of pieces on the board, just forces ripple repetition and just call it a day with a draw. But white here in this position, probably with a little bit of an active position, I think doesn't want to settle for a draw, so he plays on rook f1, a good move, brings the other rook into the game, and now we see still an equal position, interesting, but everything developed with white, and basically a bad position for black. c5, now striking the center, removing the strong knight, knight f3, queen d7. I think very subtle move. Queen c7 would have been better. The problem with queen d7 is that it walks into e5, and if you take the pawn, the knight takes, and now the queen is attacked here. So this break with e5, opening the line against the black king, is something that you see often in such positions, and I think a strong player can calculate in this position that at some point this break is gonna come. It's very forced, it attacks here, and this pawn is always under attack. If you move it forward, it might hang, so queen d7 also. The problem is, what I want to say is, after e5, if you push now, bishop takes c5, the pawn is hanging, so you can't really push d5 in this position, and if you take, then knight takes, so this is why this e5 move is very strong, I think, and after queen d7 it's very nicely possible. Knight d5, a move that was played because you can't capture and you can't move forward, as I just shown. Knight d5, but now e takes d6, queen takes d6. We have isolated one of the pawns here. The king is still in the center, and the position now is close to winning for white, even though he's still down a pawn. g6, That's the idea that I wanted to show earlier. It's an inaccuracy according to the engine. The engine wants to reroute the bishop over here and maybe even use this open e file for the rook, that the bishop is not in the way of the rook. I think g6 makes a lot of sense, but I wanted to show this bishop f2 variation anyway. And here you have to play h6. If you take the pawn here, the rook is hanging in the corner, so you need to keep the position closed. h6, knight g5, knight takes e3, a move that is probably not so good, but the defense is already pretty difficult here, because after knight f7 there is a fork, queen and rook. Queen needs to move, queen d4. The engine already here wants to take the knight. I think also a natural move, in my opinion. After g takes f7, king e7, rook takes e3, and black is still up a pawn, but this is a very dangerously passed pawn, and I'm not so sure how you're gonna win this in the near future with black, so this is why here the pawn is also hanging, and maybe there is pressure here, you can double and triple. So a very comfortable endgame for white, but not winning. After queen d4, the problem is that rook takes knight, and now everything starts falling apart. The rook is attacked in the corner. So now he took the knight, knight takes f7, queen takes e6, not taking the knight immediately, king d8, queen e7 check, king c8, and g takes f7, and the pawn is just promoting on the next move, which is why player with the black piece has resigned in this position. A very nice, actively played game by white, I think. And I want to show you the mate in 6, by the way. In this position, if you don't want to just take the knight and win the game, you could have as well take with the rook here, and then you have basically one check with the queen, the rook blocks, queen takes rook, queen e1, rook e8, queen d2 check, king c8, queen d7 check, king b8, and queen takes b7 checkmate. Just to show you that in this position, instead of just taking the knight and winning, you could have as well just take here, and then the back rank is just weak on the 7th rank. And there's a forced mate in 8 for all of those of you who wanted to calculate this. But of course, this is also just winning g takes, and you can't stop the queening process in the next move, which is resignable. Is like absolutely understandable that black resigns here. 1-0, I think very interesting game with the Göring Gambit, starting with the center game, which I already think is very surprising for most opponents, and then when you gambit a pawn, you can even gambit another pawn here with bishop c4, and play this position if you like this, or how Kulikov played in the game with knight takes c3, and then just develop naturally with this queen maneuver, which I think is very nice, and try to play an active game with white instead of just going for something like Rui Lopez or Italian game, which we've seen millions of times. Gambit, always spicy. Check out my playlist if you want to see more chess game analysis videos. I regularly stream on Twitch, check it out in the description. If you want to follow me on Instagram, link is also in the description. And see you in the next video. Bye.